This is the Solid Signal Podcast for the week of November 6th, 2023. Now, this morning I read on one of the websites that I read every morning that the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Actors, SAG-AFTRA, have been presented with what studios are calling a best and final offer that they are taking 24 hours to consider. Now, maybe that's a good offer, maybe that's a bad offer. I don't know because I haven't read it. What I do know is that that's not necessarily how you negotiate things and saying, oh, best and final offer. That's kind of a power move that doesn't necessarily bring a lot of collaboration to a negotiating process. But I suppose that's not the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is to talk about the fact that if you are trying to save traditional scripted broadcasting and media, that this is precisely how you do not do it. I have to say that I'm very invested in the idea of scripted media, whether it's television, streaming, or whatever, the movies or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. The idea is that I like scripted stuff. Reality TV and things like that have their place. But if given the choice between quality scripted material and just kind of reality stuff, I would always choose the quality scripted material. And this is putting aside something like news, which is also, if it's done right, is going to be somewhat scripted. It's going to be presented in such a way that you are given a meaningful understanding of the events and not just somebody pointing a camera at it and not giving you any context. I was thinking back last night that in addition to, of course, just like most of us, living the majority of my life with, linear television and movies being the only way that you could get this kind of scripted entertainment, that also I've really spent a lot of my career in service of this kind of entertainment. A long time ago, I was involved in the making of such programs, and I've been involved working with companies that supply such programs and the companies that distribute them for, regular customers like you and me. For example, satellite TV companies and streaming companies. I've spent a lot of my life really focused on this kind of thing. And if you look at what I may or may not leave behind as a legacy, I think that scripted media of all types are going to feed really right into it. And so my level of investment is high, and that's why I'm kind of making this podcast. Now, I'm not expecting any of the major players on either side to be listening to it. More to the point, I think that it's my attempt to explain the frustration that I'm feeling right now when it comes to the ongoing actors' strike. And before I get into the meat and potatoes of that, let me just say that I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm not here to talk about my point of view as to who's right and who's wrong and whether the deal is any good, because I'll be really, really honest with you. I have no idea if it's any good, and probably you don't either. I think that all we can do is try to understand what the issues are here on both sides, and those have been covered exhaustively. I'm not going to advocate for either side at this point, even though I will admit I do have a strong feeling about who's right and who's wrong. I'm just not really making this podcast about that. Here's what this podcast is really about. There has never been such a huge amount of unscripted, independent media out there. Every day, millions of minutes of YouTube content and TikTok content are created. I don't even have a number for how much it is. And even if there was a number, it probably would be out of date because it's going up so fast. There is a massive amount of stuff that could entertain you if this is the kind of thing that entertains you. If you're the sort of person who likes to scroll through TikTok and watch 2 to 3 seconds of a whole bunch of stuff to decide if you like it, and it being kind of jokey and whatever, that more power to you. That's your thing. My thing is to sit down and invest in something that lasts more than 12 seconds to try to go on a ride that eventually leads me to be entertained or informed in some way. I'm willing to take the time to do that. And I'm also willing to take the time to recognize that writing stuff down, to actually having a point of view when you broadcast is important. And yet, for the first time, perhaps, I am worried that this form of entertainment, scripted programming, is on the ropes. It's on the ropes precisely because there is so much stuff out there that is unscripted and created by independent individuals, of which I am one of them, by the way, and this podcast is one of them. And it's really not that bad, and it's getting better. It's evolving constantly. And so if you're a creator of scripted entertainment, whether you're an actor or a director or the head of a studio, whether you're involved from bottom to top in the idea of scripted entertainment, you should be very, very worried right now. You have just been out of the fight for 1/3 of a year at this point, at a time when unscripted entertainment is evolving so quickly, when new content creators are coming online and becoming superstars almost immediately. There are people who are top media creators right now, YouTubers, TikTokers, call them what you will, who really even weren't part of the game when the actors' strike started. That's how fast things change. And keep in mind, too, yes, things have been shut down for, like I said, 1/3 of a year at this point, like 4 months. And it's not going to start up immediately. I think the impact of this strike is going to be felt for a year or more. I mean, come on, we saw this just a couple of years ago. I don't want to get too far into the whole pandemic argument, and that's really not the topic of this podcast. But we saw what happened when productions shut down, and then there was nothing to watch. And this is one of the reasons that we have seen independent, unscripted productions like YouTube and TikTok just go up in popularity, because that's what there is. And if I were running a studio or running a union or anywhere in between, I would be very cognizant of the fact that regardless of whatever deal I come to today, and I really hope today is the day they come to a deal, that it's going to be months before things are really back to normal. It's going to be a year before the pipeline for media is back to normal. And that gives a huge advantage to the non-union, unscripted, non-studio content creators out there who are desperately growing what they do and evolving what they do. I'm not saying in any way that the actors shouldn't have stricken. I'm not quite gone on strike. Anyway, I'm not saying that the actors shouldn't have gone on strike. I'm not saying the studios shouldn't have held their ground. I'm not saying any of that stuff. What I'm saying is that the amount of time it's been at this point is really hurting everyone. I mean, they're talking about billions of dollars being lost already, to both sides being really dug in. And the potential impact over time is probably tens of billions of dollars. And I think if you look at it that way, you have to look at what both sides are asking for to see if it's really worth losing tens of billions of dollars on. I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure that it should have gone on this long and that there be so much loss. It just, I feel for the people who are really suffering for this. The argument for the actors is, of course, that the majority of people who are involved in this side of the business aren't making millions and millions and millions of dollars. They're day players who make less than minimum wage often in order to just get into a business that they really want to get into. And that really it's, the 1/100th of 1% of people who are really making a profitable living out of this, and everybody else is just struggling. And the actors say, well, we owe it to those people who are struggling to get them a better deal. And on the other hand, the studios are saying that as a result of all of this unscripted independent programming, that it becomes harder and harder for them to justify the costs involved in making these incredibly expensive productions. Movies today routinely cost over $100 million to make already, and that's a large amount of money to have to make back before you even see $1 of profit. So I get it that you want to hold the line on costs where you can, and on the same time you want to be fair to the people who are just in the business because they want to be in the business. There's good arguments on both sides, but I'll tell you what there isn't. There doesn't seem to be a shared understanding between the studios and the actors of exactly how this is hurting their future. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I will get a reply. Matter of fact, nothing would make me happier, by the way, than if somebody like SAG president Fran Drescher were to hear this podcast and actually comment and tell me all the things I did wrong. Or if Discovery head David Zaslav would hear this podcast and tell me all the things that I've gotten wrong. I'd love that. I'd love to see that somewhere, but I don't think it's going to happen. So all I can do is go with what I know. It seems to me that here we are. It's almost 2024 at this point, and the strike has been going on longer than anybody expected. And I want to say that it's the longest running actors strike in history. I could be wrong. I did a little bit of research. That's the suggestion that I got. But anyway, this has gone on too long. I said this before when it came to the Writers Guild of America strike, and I will say that in this case also, it has gone on too long. Both sides need to take an honest look at what's going on. Stop saying things like best and final offer and start saying things like, let's sit down and really understand each other in a way that is going to help us move forward and help us end this strike. Stop posturing. Stop stepping behind things like falling profits or whatever. Stop claiming that that the people who are at the top can't help, because the people who are at the top can help, by the way. And I get it too. A lot has been made of the fact that a coalition of very well-paid actors were volunteering to take pay cuts in order to try to end the strike. And there's something about, I don't know if it's the union contract or the charter or the law or whatever, that prevented them from doing it. It was like a great idea, but when you look at the fine print, you couldn't do it. Well, let's talk about why you can't do it. Maybe change the rules so you can do it. And regardless of whether or not it is going to end the strike, maybe what these, 1/100% actors need to do is voluntarily make sure that they are taking a fair amount of money for their work and not an insane amount of money for their work. Maybe from the point of view of the studios, maybe what they need to do is spend a lot more time working on cost control and budgeting before something gets to costing $100 million and not after. And all in all, both sides can come up with better productions, don't cost as much, and that can be profitable. I'll say this one last thing. Over the weekend, I had the opportunity to watch 2 movies on streaming services. One was called My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3, and the other was called Five Nights at Freddy's, based on the popular video game. Okay, neither of these films are advancing the art form of cinema as we know it. However, one thing that you can say about both these films, and otherwise they are quite different, is that both films were made on very, very small budgets by people who clearly wanted to make the films. They were made reasonably with, probably no CGI, or if any, a little bit of tiny bit of CGI, and with actors who don't cost zillions of dollars. And as a result, both of them will probably be profitable, even though the budgets were tiny. They're going to be profitable because they don't have to make up this incredible amount of money. Neither of these films is going to make $100 million in streaming or rentals, and they probably didn't make it in the box office. In fact, neither film was incredibly well reviewed by critics who, that how movies are criticized is another whole podcast, which maybe I'll do someday. It's not really the point of this one. But both of these films had a clear intention to create a level of enjoyment for the kind of people who like these films on a relatively small budget in a way that just kind of made sense so that everybody can move on. The fact that neither of them is Citizen Kane is not the point. The real point is that I watched both films, and at the end of both films, believe it or not, I felt pretty good about them. And I felt like the intention of the filmmakers had been honored. No, they weren't perfect, and yes, they could have both been better, and they should have been better if they maybe a little bit better editing and a little bit better writing. I get that, but they weren't. What they were, however, is decent movies that came out and I watched them and they probably made money. Maybe that's the model we need to talk about from now on. Instead of spending $1 billion on a movie like Avatar 2 that could never, ever make up that amount of profit for everybody. Anyway, that's about all I've got on the Solid Signal podcast. I know this is a long one, and I am really grateful to all of you for kind of hanging in there with me and listening to me rant. Do me a favor, if you like this kind of podcast, like, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you listen to or watch this podcast. Come back over and over again to listen. Shop at solidsignal.com, who sponsor this podcast. They're really great people and they pay the bills for me, I'll say that. And if you need the kind of customer service that you think has gone out of style, then work with the people at Signal Connect. 888-233-7563 is their number, and the website is signalconnect.com. They'll give you the service that you deserve. Anyway, that's about all for the Solid Signal podcast. You have a great one, and I will talk to you again next week.